to tell the story of how I ended up in the Marine Corps.
Yes, you do. All right, so today is June 29th, 2020, and what is your full name?
David Michael Martin,
And what is your birthday?
July 8th, 1950,
And where were you born?
Flint, Michigan.
And when did you attend high school? Did you attend high school in Flint?
Yeah, I did.
Okay,
Yeah.
so were you born, like, so you lived in Flint your whole life?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
until now.
Yeah, I graduated in 1968.
Okay, so that was my next question. So you graduate high school in 1968, which is an interesting year to graduate high school. And so before you graduate high school, what knowledge did you have about Vietnam and communism before you go into the military?
Not a whole lot about communism, but the Vietnam War was on TV every night. My father was always, when the news came on, I'm the oldest of 12 kids, and when the news came on, all 12 of us better be quiet. And he would watch the news religiously every night, and so I knew, I knew what was going on, and I loved to read, and I'd always read the newspaper, and I'd see the article about the guy from Flint that had died and everything, and then. But as far as the political part of it, I didn't know too much about it. I know people were protesting and things like that, but I didn't know anybody personally that was doing that. Our school was kind of, I don't know, I guess insulated. We weren't allowed to have hair past our ears or necks and stuff. We couldn't touch your collars, so you didn't really have any hippies wandering around. Maybe hippies at heart, but not in person. So I didn't really, I knew about what was happening in Vietnam. I didn't know too much about why it was happening,
So when you were in high school and you were watching the news with your dad and you were seeing what was going on in Vietnam, did you have a feeling like, I want to join the military, or were you afraid you were going to get drafted so you joined instead, or how did you join the military?
I came from the generation that I was born 5 years after the end of World War II. So we grew up with, as I have said in essays I've written, we grew up with the pictures on the wall. And there was, my uncles and my father fought in Korea. My grandfathers fought in World War I. So it was like, well, the country's at war, Martins go, So I knew on some level I was going to go in the military. I just wasn't sure where, and I hadn't really decided whether I would wait to get drafted or I'd enlist or whatever. And then a friend of mine, Perry Baker, he said he was going to join the Air Force. And he said, you ought to go in with me on a buddy plan. We'll go to boot camp together, everything else. Well, he joined on I think it was the 5th of July, something like that. And my parents said no, I was 17. So he went and joined, and he called me and he said, the recruiter says if you can get in before Friday, we could still go on a buddy plan. Well, my birthday was Wednesday, so I turned 18, and off I went. Went down the Federal Reserve Building, and this big, huge room, and each service had a cube in the corner. And I went in, and the only one there was a Marine Corps recruiter, and he said, who are you here to see? And I said, I'm here to see the Air Force recruiter. He said, well, I'll be back in a while, have a seat. So I sat down, and he's like, you ever thought about the Marine Corps? No, the Marine Corps is really tough. You wait for the Air Force guy. And this went on for like a half hour, 40 minutes, I said, well, mate, no, you have got to be very tough to get through a Marine Corps boot camp. Only the toughest men can do that. You wait for the Air Force recruiter. So my little 18-year-old mind's going, what are you trying to say, man? And by the time the Air Force recruiter came back, I had signed up for 4 years in the Marine Corps. I told that story to the Air Force recruiter here in town. The Marine Corps recruiter was right across from her. And she pointed at him. He goes, they still do that. Yeah.
It's part of their master plan.
So that's how I end up in the Marine Corps. And, I've never regretted it. It caused me a lot of pain in my life, but it also caused me some good stuff. I'm very proud of being a Marine, and it was nice when we were finally able to start being proud of it openly, but that's how I ended up in the Marine Corps, and the recruiter was telling the truth. It was the toughest thing I have ever done. Both physically and emotionally and mentally. They just, oh my God, I was off the bus like 30 seconds going, what the hell have I done? Standing on them yellow footprints and just they're screaming at us and punching us, and I'm like, I thought they told we couldn't be hit. Bam, you know, like, and and you just like, everybody seems so angry, you know, and then they're like, we thought you'd be happy we're here. You seem to be mad that we're here, you know. So, and so looking back on it now, though, it gave me a lot of the stuff that I needed to get through life, you know. It's kind of ironic. When I went through my counseling, at one point we had to write a thing about what's the most negative experience in your life. And I wrote about being in the Marine Corps. And later, several months down the road, wrote a thing about what's the most positive thing. And he said, you know what? All but one of you wrote the same thing that was the most negative was the most positive, your time in the military. You know, and I still use it to this day, the discipline and things like that, you know. So, but that's how I ended up in the Marine Corps. I was heading for the Air Force, but I got rerouted.
They snatched you away.
Yeah.
So you joined the Marines in July of '68.
'68.
And then you went to basic in San Diego.
Yeah.
And then tell me about what you did until you got to Vietnam in the military.
Okay, I went through. I actually left. They sent me down for my physical the next day, and I had not yet told my parents. And we got done with the physical, and we got sworn in, and they said, "Well, if you want to go home for a week, take care of your personal affairs, you can, or you could leave tonight." And I'm like, "I'm 18. I ain't got any personal affairs." So they fed us and took us to Metro Airport, and I called my parents and said, I called my mom and I said, I joined the Marine Corps. She said, well, come home, let's talk about it. I said, it's too late, Mom, I already signed up. She said, well, when you leaving? I said, about 2 hours. I'm at the airport right now. She was livid. But we flew to San Diego. We went through boot camp. Like I said, it was one of the toughest things I ever did. We got through, it was 13 weeks back then. And about halfway through, we went to Pendleton for rifle training. And you know, you can't even walk together when you first get there. In fact, they call you a herd. You put your hand on the shoulder in front of the guy in front of you, and they'll go, herd, move, you know, and you just kind of shuffle along. And then one day you realize, well, I screwed up, and he told me to give him 40 push-ups, and I dropped down, did them, got right back up again. You're like, couldn't do that when I got here. The unique thing about boot camp, and it's probably the same way in the other services, but especially in Marine Corps, everybody that needed to gain weight, gained weight. Everybody needed to lose weight, lost weight. We were all doing the same thing, eating the same thing, but we got through boot camp, and then I still remember the day. We didn't have the crucible back then, but I still remember the day the drill instructor told us to fall out on the company street. And we got out there on the street, and he said, and it's just like Full Metal Jacket. He said, today you're no longer, you know, and he had a string of obscenities that you're now officially United States Marines, and that was a big deal. There was 68 of us that graduated. We started with 75. 64 of us were made 0311, or as we call it, grunts, because they needed bodies in Vietnam right now, you know. So we left boot camp. We went to what was called Infantry Training Regiment, because all Marines are trained as riflemen, and so everybody went through that. And if you were an 03, which would be 0311, you know, grunt, and then you got machine gunners and mortarmen, and then we went to what was called BITS, Basic Infantry Training Specialties. So like I had more training in the infantry and in fire team tactics, things like that. And then we were given 20 days leave to go home, and I apparently should have waited a couple more days before I joined, because my leave expired at midnight on December 24th.
Oh.
And so I came back because I was scared not to, and all they did was give us $50 and a Liberty card to go into town, and they gave us a bed in the barracks. Half the guys didn't come in till the day after Christmas, and nothing was done to them. But anyway, after that, when we come back from that, we went into what was called Staging Battalion. And you're getting ready to leave, and you're doing some more training. You're getting 897,000 shots, and You know, there was times when you're going down the line and they're hitting you in both arms at the same time with the Ameriguns. I remember asking a corpsman, "What are these shots for?" He goes, "For shit you never heard of, Marine." You know, but you're just you're learning about things that they came up with. A little bit more. They did spend some time on Vietnam and the customs of Vietnam and things like that, but not a lot. So after staging, you leave.
And so this is January of
1969, yeah.
1969, okay.
Mhm. Yeah, so we flew to Okinawa. I always say I've been to Hawaii, but I was only there like 20 minutes. The plane lands, and of course that's back in the day when they used to roll the stairs up to the plane, and we walked down the stairs, across the tarmac, and up another set of stairs into another plane.
It counts. You were there.
We never understood. One of the big mysteries for me is we had this huge Air Force, and the Marine Corps had a lot of planes, and we flew over on commercial airliners. Stewardess and all, you know, it's kind of weird. But we flew to Okinawa, and we were there for about 3 or 4 days. Had to store all our dress uniforms. I remember going in the warehouse, and our sea bags were stacked to the ceiling, literally like 30 high, huge warehouse. And we had got some more shots, and everybody who had not yet been promoted to PFC got promoted. I guess they didn't want any E1s getting killed over there. And then the next morning we got on the plane and we went to Vietnam, and that was another long flight. And then we got off the plane.
Where did you enter the country? In Da Nang?
Da Nang, yeah. And I remember stepping off the plane, and the first thing was the heat and the humidity. It, like you couldn't even breathe. And the second thing was the stink. The stench was unbelievable. Found out later it's because they have like outhouses, and they put half of a 55-gallon drum under them. And then guys that have been goofing off, they pull them out, they pour diesel fuel on them and burn them off, put them back under. But we were kind of taken off and taken in another, like a huge hangar, like a warehouse kind of thing, and we're all lined up and going to get our assignment. And I kept hearing, in the line I was in, I kept hearing 19, 19. I'm like, oh my God, not 19. 19 was known as the Walking Dead. They had so many KIAs, they'd even had 4 battalion commanders killed, which never happens.
Right.
And I'm like, oh no, not 19, 19. Like 3 guys ahead of me, they start going 14, 14, 14. So I get my orders, and I said, well, how do I get, they give you a little piece of a map, and they're up in Quang Tri, way up north, and I said, well, how do I get there? And he goes, well, you get up there the best way you can. So we go outside, about 4 or 5 of us, and we see this sergeant, and we ask him. He goes, they're supposed to tell you how to do that. He said, you see that little shack down there? You go and tell them where you're going. And if any trucks or choppers come in, they're heading that direction, they'll get you on them, So we finally got there to the company. I was in Delta Company.
And what division were you in? What division were you in? Marine Division?
3rd Marine Division,
okay.
yeah. And got there, got to the company, checked into the company. They gave us, they issued us all kinds of 782 gear. And then we got a weapon, and that's the first shock we had, because we had trained all the way through boot camp, ITR, bits, to staging with M14s, and they hand me an M16. And I'm looking at this plastic thing going, what is this? We're all like, what are these things, So they tell us what platoon we're in, so we go down to our separate platoons, and the first thing the platoon sergeant did was take about half the gear that they gave me and throw it away. He said, none of this is any good. You don't need this, you don't need that. I remember he took my gas mask and he pulled the gas mask out of the bag and he threw it in the box. He said, keep the bag, it's handy for carrying extra ammo, stuff like that. And then he said, I'm going to tell you guys right now, all the training you've been through, none of it means anything here. None of it's going to work.
And what did you feel when he said that?
My heart just went into my stomach. I'm like, God, if we're not, then we're not trained for what, He said, no, because we were taught the old method of fire team advancement and things like that. It just doesn't work in the jungle, But he said, all you FNGs, follow me, and we're dying in this heat. And they had told us when we were in staging, you're going to have to drink, like a couple gallons of water a day to stay hydrated. And it sounded so ridiculous, But you find out, you walk along and all of a sudden you're flopping on the ground and they're throwing water on you and telling you to take sips. Took a while to get acclimated, But I think the first thing that I noticed was the attitudes of the Marines that had been there a while. I was used to Marines that were sharp and all that, and then they're just, these guys just seem like, I don't know, I don't want to say defeated because we never did feel defeated, but just like I just got to get through this somehow, And of course, when you're a new guy in the squad, nobody makes friends with you at first. They wait, and you're just the FNG. That's. I found out later that Naga became the same way. You just don't want to know their name, just in case, But by the time I got there, things had wound down quite a bit. The 68, they had the case on, they had the Tet offensive, all that. We were doing patrols, but not quite often. Nothing would happen.
Let me ask you. So the major Tet offensive was in '68, but there was a smaller Tet offensive in '69.
Mm-hmm.
Were you a part of that at all?
No, I went where we were at up in north. We weren't really affected by that because it was up at the Quang Tri province. There wasn't really any big cities or anything like that.
So you were in I Corps?
Yeah, a lot of village, stuff. We didn't do a lot of patrol, a lot of perimeter duty.
Okay.
War's been described as huge bouts of incredible boring, interrupted by small amounts of incredible terror.
Do you think that's true?
Pretty much, yeah. You didn't, it's not. You're not fighting all the time. You're fighting very little of the time, really. And so, and that's it just creeped. I've talked to a lot of the Iraq and Afghanistan Marines, and I told them one of the things that I was really jealous of was that the ability they had to stay in touch with their families, like Skyping on the computers. They had a lot of them had cell phones, things like that. We would get like 6-7 letters all at one time, and you would arrange them with your postmark. I remember my mom. She always made me a carrot cake for my birthday. Cream cheese frosting, and it was a scratch cake. She used fresh carrots and pineapple and raisins and all that. Well, she did not know it was going to take 3 to 4 weeks to get to me. So when I opened the box, the cake had fermented and was all busted up, and we ate it anyway. So it was just. I never told her that. Because when I got one of her letters, I wrote her back, said thank you for the cake, and I shared it with the guys, and but because she had been sending cookies and stuff, and they didn't matter how long they took, but it was nice, nice thought. I found out several years after I got out of the Marine Corps, everybody takes the same picture with a couple of their buddies and their flak jackets and holding their weapons, and they got grenades hanging out their suspenders and all that. And I, of course, sent the roll of film home and found out several years later my mom took one look at that picture and started bawling. And when I found out about it, I asked her, what made you cry in that picture? She said, I don't know, something about looking at that picture made me realize you weren't in California playing Marine anymore, that you really were in the places where they were watching on TV. And of course, they got, with me over there, the rule about being quiet was even stricter because Dad would try to listen for my unit to be mentioned or anything, so.
So when you're in Vietnam in '69, this is the beginning of the de-escalation for the U.S., right? Under Nixon, we started, pull troops out. So as we're starting our slow extraction from Vietnam, did you ever hear anything about, the anti-war movement or things going on at home? And if you did, how did you think about that? How did you feel about it?
We heard about it, but from other Marines coming in who were just fresh from the States, and they were talking about it. You know, the universities, the colleges were going crazy and all that, and they a lot of people were against the war, and then they felt the war was wrong, and we were always like, we could have told them that, you know, but we figured it out before they did, you know, but and I never hated anybody for that, and to this day I still haven't hated anybody for that. I don't even hate draft dodgers. They did what they thought they had to do. What I hated was their anger at the war was taken out on us. And I understand we were somebody they could get to. You know, they couldn't get to the government, you know, but they could get to us. And obviously we come home, and you could spot us a mile away with the short hair and everything else, you know, so. But we heard a lot about flags being burnt and stuff like that, and you know, it bothered us, but it didn't bother us to the extent it did till after we got home and we had it directed at us personally, you know. Then that's when it really started, you know. The VFW did not want us.
Yeah.
Hardy, that you'll talk to tomorrow, is one of my most active guys here, but he's not a member here. And he tried to join here and they wouldn't take him. So he was up north one time and somebody said, let's go to the VFW, and they said, oh. He said, no, they don't want us guys. And he goes, oh yeah, this post does. He went there and he joined. He hasn't been back to that post in like 20 years. But like out of loyalty, he stays on their roster because they let him in, you know, so.
I think that when you think about issues like that, one of the lessons we did learn as a country from Vietnam is we see with current wars is you don't blame the soldiers, right? And I feel like we didn't learn a lot of lessons from Vietnam, but we did learn that because when people come home from Iraq and Afghanistan, it doesn't seem like they're treated the same way that you guys were. And at least if you don't agree with the war, you can support the people that are being sent there.
We always say don't hate the war, not the warrior.
Exactly.
You know, if you go to a major airport and troops are coming in the middle of the night, you'll see a bunch of Vietnam veterans there. One of the things that we pledged to the VVA was that would never happen again, you know. So they're greeted and they're known that they're appreciated, stuff like that. At the time, in order to fly standby, which was half price and everything, you had to be in uniform. And so we were easily spotted in the airports and stuff, you know. And yeah, you know, it's like hate the war, don't hate the guy fighting it. You know, you've been asked 100 times, why did you go? I took an oath, and that may not mean much to you, but it meant to me. You know, I have a T-shirt, and a lot of the guys have the same T-shirt. It says my oath of enlistment never expired. You know, and that's how we feel. You know, no, I think they did learn from how they treated us to not. I remember after Desert Storm and they had all the big parades and stuff, we were pissed.
I was going to ask you that. How did that make you feel?
Oh, we were mad. I was so mad.
Because that wasn't that far after Vietnam.
We weren't mad at the troops.
Right.
You know, we were not mad at them at all. But the way that they treated them, the big parades, and everybody's gushing over them, the government is, and celebrities were, and we're just like, are you kidding me? You know, and nothing against them, but we were like, you guys hardly fired a weapon. People were running around saying, please let me surrender, you know, you know, but it hurt.
Yeah.
You know. We bristle when somebody will say, you know, we lost the Vietnam War. No, we didn't. We won every major battle we ever fought. The war was lost in Paris.
And it was lost by politicians.
Yeah, it was lost in Paris. Henry Kissinger surrendered. We never did.
Yeah.
And years later, the generals and stuff in North Vietnam said, we never understood why you never invaded North Vietnam. We could not have stopped you.
Well,
Yeah.
the Cold War context, right, with the fear of getting Russia and China involved directly, because
Yeah.
we learned that from the Korean War with China coming into the war, and I can understand that. I think from a politician side. Let's go back into Vietnam for a minute. So, you arrived in January 1969. How long were you there?
I was there about 7 months.
Okay, so you leave probably August, September.
Yeah.
So when you get to Vietnam, what did you ever have any contact with Vietnamese civilians?
Very little. We're mostly in villages and stuff. We had a lot of villages in our area, and we would, of course, you had any time you establish a fire base, the nearest village they set up business. You know, they become laundry people and everything else. But I never had a lot of contact with them. I never had any negative dealings with them, but you know, a lot of the guys would go in and try to get to know them, stuff like that. I just never really did. Because my thought on it is, as far as I was concerned, they could have the country. But the little dealings I did have with them, they were respectful. They were. I felt bad for them because they were the ones paying the biggest price. It really, the couple that I ran into that could speak English and stuff, that we talked to, they really didn't care who won. Just somebody win and get it over with, because at my level here in the village, it doesn't matter. I just want all the planes and stuff to stop. And so I never had much dealings with them. But like I said, what I did, they were respectful. They were, they just wanted somebody to go away, anybody,
Did you ever have any, so with the small dealings you did have with civilians, were you ever have any sense of fear or anxiety over if they were VC or civilians?
Oh, we always had that.
Yeah.
We always had that. You developed the what I call the bullshit sensor. It's something. It still works to this day. I'll meet a guy, seems like a great guy, but something in my brain's going, keep an eye on him. And I'm right more often than not, that it turns out he was a scammer or whatever. But you always had that where you were looking. You never stopped looking, and because it happened. Things like if there were a lot of teenage boys in the village, that was suspicious. Because most of them were taken into the South Vietnamese Army, so what are they doing here, and you learn to watch people when certain individuals walk around. You'd be talking to somebody and somebody would walk by and they clam up. So now you're suspicious of this guy. Why is this guy afraid of this guy, So you always kept on your toes about it. You never fully relaxed with them, I now know several Vietnamese people. In fact, last year I met a gentleman whose father was an officer in the South Vietnamese Army, or a high-ranking officer, and that's how they got to Vietnam, because the American military knew when they were leaving, if he was left behind, he would be executed, because he worked with the American troops. So they brought the family out, and we had a good conversation. I told him, I said, tell your dad when you see him an old Vietnam Marine said Semper Fi. He says, I'll tell him, he'll get a kick out of it. But you never really relax. And even children, you just kept an eye on the children, and we'd heard a lot of horror stories, and some of them were true. Remote detonating children and stuff, because, American soldiers had always been sucker for kids. Every war we've ever been in, we're passing out candy and things like that. And they know that, so you just you don't, if you want to go down to the local village, you always go with somebody. You never went by yourself, and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I have no hate for the I don't even have hate for the Vietnamese soldiers. They were probably wanting to go home as bad as we did, you know.
So that's another question I have is, did you have any, you were pretty far north in South Vietnam, but did you have any contact with some of the ARVN soldiers from the South
Oh
Vietnamese
God,
Army?
yes.
And what were your impression of them as soldiers?
We used to joke about having selling ARVN M16s. They only been dropped once, you know. I wasn't personally involved, but I know some units where they were going to move through an area with the ARVN, they would put the ARVN in front of them and say, well, you know, that's your choice. You're going to fight them, or you're going to turn around and run, then you're going to fight us, you know. And that's, you know, that there were stories of them turning and opening fire, you know, and so, you know, they, you know, they didn't want to be doing that anymore, and we did. But you know, it's human nature to go with the side you think is going to win. You know, and I'm sure at some point it looked like, you know, they would, and you never know. Maybe they had family, and they were told if you don't do this, your family dies or something. So, I have no hate for them. I know some guys that do. For a lot of years, I had no feelings either way about them, you know. But I never had a lot of contact personally. I seen them. We were always kind of making fun of them because they were so little, and you know. But of course, everybody's little over there. But and by that time, a lot of the ARVNs were concentrated down south. Mm-hmm. You know, down around Da Nang and even Saigon, like that. So we didn't see a lot of them. Okay. You know.
What was your main job in your unit?
I was an infantry. I was a rifleman.
So it was pretty much your day taken up with like patrols and guard
well, when we
duty
did
like
patrols, we did perimeter guard, and of course there's the never-ending job of filling sandbags, and there's always things to do. A lot of downtime, a lot of doing nothing inside the wire. Mm-hmm. You always have perimeter guard 24 hours a day. You take turns doing that. We had the occasional, you know, we'd go out on patrols, but they weren't as frequent as they'd been years before. I think we'd kind of gotten into an attitude of, well, we'll just stay in here and they'll stay in theirs, and we'll leave each other alone. Mm-hmm. You know, I knew that our division was going home pretty soon because we'd been there the longest. That's why I was only there 7 months, and I was worried about it, but I managed somebody decided we would all just go home, and we thought maybe they'd send us to a 1st Marine Division unit to finish out our tour, but things were winding down so much they just sent the whole division home, you know. But yeah, it's like I said before, it's a lot of boring time. Some guys drank, some guys smoked dope, some guys did both. You know, I tried weed twice, and both times I was like, "What's the big deal? Got a beer?" Yeah, it just didn't. Yeah, it just didn't appeal to me. You know, and so tried it out of curiosity, but they. And that's all we had to drink was beer, warm beer at that. There was no ice available. But a lot of clean, you always kept your weapons clean and stuff. You never knew when you were going to have to go out, or, you know, if the wire was, if you did get an attack on the base or something. So you always cleaned your weapons and took care of your gear. And you found ways to kill time. Slept a lot, you know. But like I said, you if you saw like a sergeant coming towards your hooch, you go out the back door because you knew he was looking for Marines for a detail. And it's usually something like digging trenches or firing off the shitters or something. And like, nah, out the back door, you know.
So while you were in Vietnam, did your base sustain any major attacks while you were there?
We took some mortar and rocket fire. We took some. We had our wire probed. I'll say it wasn't a huge attack. It wasn't a big, large force, and sometimes they would do that just to see if there was any weak spots, and and of course, as soon as somebody would yell, goose in the wire, everybody headed for the wire. And you'd see guys coming out in their skivvies with their weapon heading. You didn't take time to get dressed. We had the rocket attacks now and then, mortar attacks, and I hated those more than anything else because you can't fight back. You just cover up your head and hope for the best. You do get an attitude after a while that if it's going to get me, it's going to get me. Which is kind of ironic because during this whole COVID-19 thing, you see that attitude in veterans already. Like, if it's going to get me, it's going to get me, But we never had any major attacks. We had one instance in my company, and it was not my platoon. It was, they had a chopper went down on top of a hill, and they sent a platoon out to guard it until the next day when they could get the wreckage out of there. Well, they have a lot of stuff on there. The reason they guard it because there's a lot of gear at that time, high tech stuff, and they ended up in an 18-hour firefight for that, trying to protect that helicopter, and before they could get get the chopper out of there stuff because somebody wanted that chopper really bad, and they finally blew the helicopter up. And when they blew the helicopter up, they kind of went away, because now what we want is not there anymore. And but they fought so long because they didn't know whether they should blow it up or not. And finally, they got a higher ranking officer who's like, blow the damn thing up, So they blew it up, But I wasn't there, but that's probably the biggest firefight we had while I was there.
So of the times that you would have contact with the enemy, whether it's on the base or on a patrol, did you feel that you encountered NVA more or VC more, or a mix?
Up north, we saw a lot of NVA.
Yeah, and that's tougher too because they were trained differently.
Yeah, they were trained better. They had the AK-47s, which we thought was just a much superior weapon. You ask any Vietnam veteran and say, "Oh, 47, that was a great weapon." In fact, a lot of guys after firefights, if they found one, they would use them because the M16 took a 5.56 millimeter, but the AK-47 was just like the M14. It took the 7.62 NATO round. So there was ammo around for the AK-47. So when guys would find them, they would start using those.
I've also read in some memoirs that the M16s jammed a lot. Was that true?
Yeah.
So it wasn't reliable for you.
No, it was. I've often said there's no pucker factor like laying behind a log in the middle of a firefight trying to take your weapon apart. And we were told years later that the reason they jammed was in order to save 5 cents a weapon, the Pentagon decided not to chrome plate the bolt. And so that's why it jammed, and after they started chrome plating the bolts, then they worked. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but some of the M16s at that time had Mattel Toy Company stamped on the stock. Mattel had the contract to make the plastic parts of the M16. That's confidence inspiring, So, but we were not a fan of it. We didn't like the weapon. It was unreliable. Anything we could do to get our hands on an M14 or an AK-47, they did. They just, another example of saving money at the cost of something else, like with the thing they had in Iraq and Afghanistan where they decided to save money by not making the armor as thick as they should have, and then guys were getting blown up, But, we never liked the weapon. We didn't like it at all. Which we thought was silly that they trained us on one weapon and gave us a different one when we got there, but that's the Marine Corps for you,
So in August, your division is going to start to be pulled out of Vietnam in August 69. Do you remember what day you left Vietnam?
No, not really.
But it was August?
It was in August sometime.
So you leave the country, where do you go after that? Did you go to Okinawa first?
We went to Okinawa, then went home, went to staging.
And
or back to Pendleton, rather.
When you went home, did you fly commercial home? did you fly a commercial flight home?
Yeah.
And did you have any experience with anyone?
Not on the plane and not in Los Angeles. I think at the Los Angeles airport they were so used to seeing military, it was no big deal. I did have one incident in the airport at O'Hare, because we always had to fly into O'Hare and then catch another flight. And the guy called me a baby killer, and my first reaction was to just beat the hell out of him, and then I don't know, I was just like, I just want to go home. I'm not going to waste my time, you know. I didn't see a lot of the overt stuff. It was more subtle. People would say, "Oh, are you in the military?" Yeah, you know, when I'd be in civilian clothes. I remember a double date I went on. A couple I knew arranged a date with a friend of theirs, and we get to the restaurant, and she's like, "Oh, don't see many men with short hair." And I said, "Well, I just got out of the military." And she said, "Oh, you didn't go to Vietnam, though, did you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, you didn't kill anybody." And I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about, you know." And she looked at her friend and said, "You could have told me. I'll take a cab home," you know. And they were shocked. They said, "We didn't know she had that attitude," you know. But that was probably the most in-my-face kind of thing that happened, you know. You'd get, you know, and I never have had long hair. I mean, I grew up, I always played sports, and back then, those days, you had to have a crew cut to play sports. My dad would have never allowed me to have long hair as a kid. I've just never had it long, you know. And even today, I found out I do a high and tight, they call it a fade. I don't know, but yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of it that was really like, bam, in my face, but you could feel it sometimes, you know. And then I moved from Flint, I moved up to Boyne City. Better to get away with it when I got up to Boyne City. I never told anybody I'd been in the military at all, you know. And true story, my first wife, I got married up there. She wanted her own home really bad. And we kept getting turned down by bank after bank after bank. And then we got turned down by another bank, and she was just really upset. And she said, I said, "Well, there's one other thing we can try." I said, "We can try and get a VA loan." So, "Oh, you had to be in the Army or something to get that." And I'm like, "Well, sit down, I got something to tell you." I hadn't even told her,
Wow.
you know. So we kept it a secret, and a lot of us did that. We moved somewhere we weren't known and just kept it a secret, you know. But over time, it started getting better. People started realizing, you know, yeah, the war was wrong, but the guys weren't. I remember when the first year I was here, they have a Memorial Day parade, and any veteran can march in it. And they have banners for each war, and they have convertibles down there for the older guys, and there's some floats, things like that. And they talked me into walking, and I was walking behind a guy named Hondo Robinson. Hondo's a Vietnam veteran, but he's 80-some years old, and they were walking behind him, and all of a sudden we could hear people applauding. But then I realized as the Vietnam veteran banner came in sight, they started applauding louder. And Hondo turned around and he goes, "Feels pretty good, doesn't it?" Yes. Yeah. I think and I've had other veterans say that the shaking hands, thanking for service, said, "You know, we like that, but we can tell you guys really like it." And I said, "Well, it took a long time for it to happen, you know, too long."
Yeah.
But one thing I agree with on President Trump is fake news, because they said on TV one time it was the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, and I'm like, no, it wasn't that long ago. You know, but you know, we've been joking, and I'll be turning 70 here shortly, and I tell people, if you'd known me in the 70s, you wouldn't have bet that I was going to make it to 40. I didn't think I was going to make it to 40, you know. But over time, people started showing us respect, and that helped with our anger. When I remember the first time, I still remember the first time somebody shook my hand and said thank you, and I didn't know how to respond. You know,
Yeah.
and I didn't know what, now we just go, you're welcome, but I didn't know what to say because it just came out of the blue.
When do you think that was? Like, what year roughly?
Probably, it was while I was in college, so it had to be between 84, 88, probably like 85, something like that. I had taken a class, I studied social work, and I love psychology. And I took a class called Abnormal Psych, and I remember the first day she said, "Now listen, every one of you is going to think you're abnormal at some point during this class, because I'm going to be reading about something and you're going to go, I do that." Yeah. So, but anyway, we had a project where had to go out and do something abnormal, not illegal, but abnormal for us, and have somebody observe us, and then we'll write about how it felt to do that and all that. And then we could get extra credit by talking about something abnormal we had done in our life. So I talked about being in Vietnam, and I was amazed because there was not a sound in the room, and the next class was hers too. And I talked that hour, and I talked most of the next hour. And that's what had happened. Well, anyway, she come up afterwards and said, "I'm giving you a day on that." I don't know why that affects me so bad. But then she said, "Your other project," she said, you don't have to do the other project. I'm going to give you a day on that because there's nothing you could do that would be more abnormal than what you just talked about. So. But I think it was right after that class, one of the guys thanked me or something, and that was the first time. God, I haven't thought about that in a long time. But yeah.
Did you feel like by the mid 80s people were more willing to talk about Vietnam and our role in the war? And
But I think by then there'd been some books, and some of them were actually written by guys who had actually been in the war. The first books were written by, rear echelon warriors, generals and stuff that never even got their feet on the ground, and that was recognized. I remember when the Marine Corps, we didn't have anything to distinguish the Marines that were in the jungle from the Marines that were in Saigon. We all got the same 3 ribbons. And we were always jealous of the Army because they had their CIB, the Combat Infantry Badge. Well, they came out with the Combat Action Ribbon and made it very clear that you couldn't just fly over a battlefield and claim you had been in battle. You had to have your boots on the ground, weapon in hand, to get it. And so a lot, when books like that first started coming out, written by people who had their boots on the ground, I think people started realizing it. I remember I read a book called A Long Walk in the Sad Rain, and it was about a squad in Vietnam. And it was just kind of a day-to-day thing, some of the weirdness of it and the drug use, but the fighting. And I always remember they had a sign outside their hooch, and describing the sign, and the sign said, "Normal ain't nothing but a cycle on a washing machine." Back then, you had delicate, normal, and I never forgot that part of it. So when books like that start coming out and being written from the perspective of the enlisted man, I think people start going, and I think people grew up. They got into their late 20s, their 30s, and went, maybe that wasn't such a cool thing that I did back then, we, at the same time, the Vietnam Veterans of America, because the VFW and Legion didn't want us, we organized our own group. And the wall had been put up a couple years before that, and we were very proud of the fact that we didn't take a damn dime from the government. We raised every penny of it. Everybody else's is white and tall. Ours is black and down in the ground, which I've been there 4 times.
So I was going to ask you that. What are your thoughts when you're at the wall?
First time I went, it was kind of weird. I didn't look any names up. I just went, and and it's a very emotional place. It could be just packed, and it's very quiet. It's like people get down in there, and like you go to the other memorials, and people are talking and everything. Something about it. Well, when my wife and we would always go on a vacation in like March, before landscaping season starts. And in fact, we got married in March because her brother said, if you want to take a honeymoon, you got to get married before landscaping starts. So, but anyway, we always pick them together. And I told my wife, I said, I would really like to go to Virginia to the Marine Corps Museum. And I'm the first veteran they've ever known, being Amish. And they have quite a few formerly Amish that live where we live. And when I first came here, they were like pretty leery of me because I'd been in a war. And I used to think, I'm like the living epitome of that Sesame Street song. One of these things is not like the other. But to their credit, they've never tried to change me. But anyway, we went to the museum and I had a great time and everything. And we had an extra day. And Clara said, well, you always said you wanted to go back to the Vietnam Wall. That's not that far away. Why don't we go there tomorrow? Well, being naive and not realizing that nobody should drive their own car in Washington, D.C., we did anyway.
It's the worst.
It is. We finally found a place to park and then got on one of those jump and go buses. But I was looking at a name. I'd looked up a few names, and I was looking at a name, and I had my fingers on the name, and all of a sudden I reared back. I just blasted that wall. Partly why the head looks like that. The Vietnam veterans from Washington that hang out at the wall. And they watch for guys like me. And he walked up and he put his arm around me and he says, "You're finally pissed off, aren't you?" That was pretty much what it was. I've been back 2 more times because when I came back and I talked to a lot of the guys here about, I had pictures and they're all like, "Oh, I wish I could go, but I don't want to go by myself." So I did some research and I did a bus tour and took 54 people down to Washington, D.C. Had an excellent bus driver. She was very cool with us. Artie up there. He might show it to you. There's a picture of me hugging him. Claire and I were walking past him. And Artie, I was, "Hi, Artie," at the wall. And I walked about 15 feet past him and I said, "Honey, I'm going to go back." Just something about his eyes. And I no sooner got to him, he just burst into tears. So upset at her hugging him, But it's a hard place to be, And you look at it, and it's a very powerful place to be. And you hear the number, but then to see it, our wall up there is the guys from Michigan. And then that brass plaque, we found that brass plaque buried in a closet. That's the guys from Holland. But it's a very emotional, powerful place to be. And people are very quiet there. They respect it. But I think when the wall came out and we were getting more vocal and demanding that we have this. I remember when the wall first opened, they did not have a flag over it. And Vietnam veterans stood there 24 hours a day, taking turns in rain and everything else, holding up an American flag. Basically shamed the government to put one there, But we got more vocal about it, and we came to realization that we hadn't done anything wrong, and we came to the realization that we deserved respect for our service, and we started demanding that we be respected. Not in a violent way, we didn't protest or anything, but we made it clear who we were and that we did what our government asked us to do, and that's what every veteran does. I remember having a guy from the VFW tell me, well, you weren't even in a war. It was never declared. I'm like, you got a bunch of guys over here with guns, a bunch of guys over here with guns who tried to kill each other. Yeah, it was a fucking
and when
war.
58,000 Americans died. It's a
Yeah,
war.
you know.
Yeah.
And but I think also people were because they were starting to talk to us, they started to realize I remember telling a couple guys who had admitted that they were, hippies and protesters back in the 60s and 70s, and I said, dude, guys, we knew way before you did that it was fucked up. Didn't take us long to figure it out at all, there was no fighting for Mom Apple Pie and Chevrolet. We were just trying to keep each other alive and get the hell out of there, If they'd have went home, we'd have went home, We didn't care. We just wanted to get through it. And it took time to make friends. One of the things that they really did wrong in Vietnam was we were rotated in and out as individuals. We trained in units, and then they split us all up. Today they send an entire unit to Iraq, and that unit comes home together. And so you already know everybody you're fighting with. And but yeah, we just went, no, we didn't do nothing wrong. I'm a goddamn United States Marine, and I deserve respect for that. And so yeah, we just refused to be quiet anymore. We just said, no, we're not going to be quiet. And you're either going to listen or just go away. But I'm going to talk, And over time, it's gotten real good. There's still some diehards out there. A friend of mine had a Vietnam veteran license plate on his car, his state license plate. And he got pulled over by the cops. And then he said, what's wrong, officer? And he goes, do you know your license plate is folded in half? So he had just one screw in it. And he got out and looked at somebody, and when he opened it up, the cop went, oh my God, are they still doing that shit? So there are a few of them out there still. And there always will be. Yeah. There's people out there that hate anybody that ever served in the military, I call them my Amish gangsters. That was before there was ever an Amish Mafia show, which, watch it with an Amish person sometime. They're like, are you kidding me? But anyway, they never wanted, one guy, he kept asking me questions about it, and one day I said, listen, why don't you come over to the house? And the movie that I think depicts combat Vietnam the closest is We Were Soldiers Once and Young. And I have the movie. And he came over to the house, and I played the movie. We watched the whole thing, and he was just silent at the end. And finally, he turned to me and he says, I understand you better now. And I said, well, take that movie and multiply it by 100, and then you got how it is to be there live, And I used to joke, you're going to go see this movie? No, I was in the play, man. Yes. But as you can probably tell, my sense of humor has been probably the thing to help me keep my sanity. Trying to always find something to laugh about, And that's pretty common in guys like me. They just, you see how we joke with each other,
Yeah. You guys are pretty savage with one another. It's funny.
We are, you know. I walk in, I seen Arnie, like, God damn it, I told him to lock the door when they saw your truck come in, you know, stuff like that, you know. He's like, I love you too, Commander, you know, so, I had somebody ask me last year, he said, 'cause we're always like, you know, I'm a Marine, so I get picked on, you know, and, you know, what color crayon did you use when you were in the Marine Corps, that kind of thing, you know. And I just tell them, you're all jealous, that's all, you know. But we go back and forth, you know. My quartermaster was in the Air Force, and I always tell him, like, you're almost like a real veteran, man, you know. So, you know, but I was asked, do the services really hate each other? I said, we're like brothers. We fight among ourselves, but you screw with one of us, you screw with all of us, you know. The best example I ever heard was a Marine who was in Vietnam, and he said, I was a Marine in the jungle, and I got shot. And a Navy corpsman crawled out under fire, stopped the bleeding, and dragged me back. An Army helicopter came in under fire, took me out of the jungle, took me to a Navy hospital in Da Nang. The Air Force flew me to Japan to a better hospital, and when I was better, they flew me back to the States, to Great Lakes Naval Hospital. He said, I don't have any quarrel with anybody, you know, so.
You're on the same team.
Yeah. One of my pet peeves about Vietnam, about the services, is that people make fun of the Coast Guard. A lot of people don't know the Coast Guard was in Vietnam, and they had the shortest life expectancy of anybody. They were on the river boats.
Yep.
They were taking fire from both sides of the river, and they would come through some hell to bring us supplies and stuff, you know.
Were they concentrated like in the Mekong Delta area?
They were down. I didn't. There wasn't any in our area, but I know they were there, and they had them little plywood boats, and they would go up through there, and you know, they would common to take fire from both sides of the river, you know, and so that's one of my pet peeves was people start making fun of the Coast Guard because they're wimps and stuff. And I heard one Coast Guard guy here, though, he says, okay, I'm a wimp. You do what I do tomorrow. I said, what is that? He says, I jump out of a helicopter into Lake Michigan to rescue people. Oh, well.
That's a good point.
But, no, I think we just got more vocal, but we got vocal in a way that wasn't antagonistic. We just stated our case. We said, you know, I did what my country asked me to do. Was the war wrong? Yeah, but I didn't know that at the time. I was an 18-year-old kid. I took an oath, and so I did what I said I'd do, you know, and I shouldn't be punished for it, you know. I should be respected for it. And over time, we did finally start getting the respect. We get a lot of respect from today's military, from, like I told you, from Iraq and Afghanistan. They said, oh, man, glad I didn't fight your war. You know, they you know, and I always tease them about some of the equipment they got. You know, we wore 8-10 canteens around our waist. They got one big thing on their back and, you know, stuff like that. But somebody one time asked me about the VFW, and I said, the VFW will always be here. Unfortunately, there'll always be another generation of veterans.
Yeah, history has shown us that.
It's the nature of the world, you know.
Nature. Let me take you back to 1969. So you get back to the United States in August, or you leave Vietnam in August. How long were you in the Marines for?
I got out about, it must have been, no, it was 5 months. I had made it clear I was not interested in re-enlisting. In fact, that was pretty funny. And they called me in, and he says, you got an excellent record, Corporal. He says, you going to just extend for 2, or you going to go for the whole 6? I said, I'm not doing anything. I can't. Why not? I said, I have an eye problem. He said, well, and I didn't think this up. I was told this by somebody else that I should do this. And he goes, well, and he's looking and he goes, I don't see anything in your file about a medical problem. What's wrong with your eyes? I said, I just can't fucking see it. He's like, well, I guess we're done talking, Corporal. So they called me in and they said, this was a few months later, and the war was winding down. And one of the things, the result was we had way too many non-commissioned officers because you're making corporal over there and stuff and sergeant. We had corporals and sergeants doing gate duty, which was usually PFCs, you know. But anyway, they said, well, do you want to get out early? And this was like probably around the 10th or 11th of December, I want to say. And I already knew I wasn't going home. I never went home. I would always just tell the married guys, you go home, I'll stay. And they said, well, all right, you're going to get out on December 31st. Oh, okay, cool. My first reaction was to call my family, and I thought, no, I'm not going to call them. I'm just going to surprise them, you know. So morning of December 31st, there's a gate at San Diego called Gate J, which is where goes right onto the runway at Lindbergh Field. It's where they brought VIPs through. So that morning I do all my checking out, get all my money, and my buddies in the military, in the MP company, they take me through the Gate J right up to the terminal. So I get my plane ticket, and so like any good Marine, I'm sitting there at 9 o'clock in the morning drinking a beer, waiting for my plane. And I don't know where the thought came from, but I remember when my uncle was in the Marines when I was little, he always came home on the train, because nobody flew back then in the early 60s. And you know, I've always wanted to take a train ride. Nobody knows I'm coming home. So I cashed my plane ticket in, took a Greyhound up to LA to the train station, and took a train from Los Angeles to Flint. I was on the train 4 days and 3 nights. Craziest New Year Eve I've ever had. Quite a combination. A lot of alcohol and people that knew they were never going to see you again. Yeah, I'm sure there was people doing things they never would have done at home.
So is that 1970, 1971 years?
Yeah, going into
71?
Yeah.
So you're out in 71. What were your thoughts about first the Paris Peace Accords in 73 and then the fall of Saigon in 75?
That pissed at 73, and it hurt me. Because that's when the talk started that it was the first war America had ever lost, and I was like, no, wait a goddamn minute, we at least should, you know. And that's when and that's pretty much a universal attitude among Vietnam veterans. And when we start hearing all that talk about, because they played it up, first war America's ever lost. Bullshit, we didn't lose it, you know. But and then to watch all that film from with the fall of Saigon, and watching helicopters taking people off of roofs and just running away with our tail tucked between our legs, it made me sick, you know. And then of course, you know, when the Pentagon Papers came out and we found out that they had known for years we had no chance of winning, you know, but they kept going because they wanted to come out with honor, you know. But just I watched them and just people dropping people on Navy ships and trying to get people off, because a lot of them were Vietnamese that had worked with the Americans. They knew if they stayed behind they were going to get killed. You know, all the guys that had died, and they were just walking away from it. You know, they left entire cities behind that we built. You know, all kinds of military equipment and stuff, and just, you know, I was disgusted by it. I think that's when I really sincerely started to hate politicians. People say, what are you, Democrat or Republicans? I'm neither one. I hate all of them, you know. I had a guy running for state senate come to my door one time, and I said, no, and you don't need to talk to me. I said, I don't even like politicians. He goes, may I ask why? I said, I'm a Vietnam veteran. He goes, oh yeah, we run into that a lot. He said, and don't get me wrong, I vote. But like I like to tell them, I'm an independent. I don't need a party to tell me what to think. I go in and I vote for Democrats, I vote for Republicans, One year I wrote in Mickey Mouse for president, you know, because I'm a firm believer that picking the lesser of two evils is still picking evil, you know. One thing I don't allow as commander here is we do not, the VFW is apolitical. We don't allow any political talk or any religious talk. And as I explained to the guys, never in the history of man has somebody went, you know, you're right, I'll switch to being a Democrat or I'll switch to being a Catholic. So there's no, it always just ends up screaming.
Well,
know?
speaking of politics, so you had mentioned the Pentagon Papers, and so what did you agree with Daniel Ellsberg leaking the Pentagon Papers, or no, or middle of the road? What are your thoughts?
I was in the middle of the road because I didn't. The information they contained was like a punch in the gut, but I didn't agree with the breaking in, and you know, I was still conservative enough back then to think that you just shouldn't do that to the government, you know. To this day, I don't know whether I would say it was right or wrong, you know.
It has impacted the way historians are able to analyze the war, though.
Yeah, it did. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. It had, you know, and of course the part that we laser focused on was the part where they said, we'll never win this, but let's stick around for 2 or 3 more years and, you know, and try to get out of here without egg on our face, you know. And it's like, no, you know, like Nixon was terrible, but he at least said, you know what, get them the hell out of there, you know. They, of course, being of the age I am, I, you know, it all died when President Kennedy died. You know, we came through the 50s and the early 60s when everything was light and beautiful and everything else, and it just, I still remember exactly where I was. I was in the I was in the 8th grade, I was 13, I was in the wood crib looking for some cedar to make my mom what we call Watnach house back then, you know. And they made the announcement that he'd been shot, and then a little bit later they announced that he had died, and we were to go home immediately. And our parents would, you know, they would see it on TV when we were supposed to come back. And we were out of school until after the funeral was over. And my dad was not one to say weighty things, but I remember we were all watching it on TV, and my dad said, "You're watching history right now," you know. So.
Yeah.
I don't want to mention my dad. He fought in Korea, and I was home on leave, getting ready to go to staging, go to Vietnam, and he said to me, "Let's go get a beer." I wasn't old enough to have a beer, but I had a Coke with him, and I thought, here it comes. Here's this is he's going to tell me what to do in a war. And so we go down to his favorite little neighborhood bar, and he gets a beer, and he said, "Well, the only thing I can tell you, Mike, is when you come home, you'll be different." So I don't know how you'll be different, but you'll be different. He was right. You know, my mom always said I was a bookworm in high school and loved the library, spent hours in the library every Saturday. Hell, I'd have lived in the library if they'd let me, you know. And my mom always said when I came home from boot camp, I'd gotten tough. And when I came home from Vietnam, I'd gotten mean. And then she'd always add, and the one you were meanest to was yourself. So I take pride in the fact that when I tell people 20-some years ago I was the guy that everybody hated and didn't want to be around because I was the angry guy, we all know the angry guy, they don't believe me, you know. And it was quite enlightening to find out that I was angry because it was a way of keeping people from hurting me. Can't get to me, can't hurt me, you know. And I didn't know that, but yeah, today I have all kinds of friends. But this is my 3rd year as commander. Everybody's like, no, you stay, you keep doing it, you know.
That's a good feeling.
Which is, yeah, it's a good feeling. But we have a saying, you could leave the war, but the war never leaves you, you know. And war does something to a man. Well, I shouldn't say man, to anybody, man or woman. I come from, the only women we had in Vietnam was nurses. The female Marines they were never even allowed to come to Vietnam. They were, back then, unfortunately, they were basically, secretaries to high-ranking officers, things like that. I have full respect for them, and they get out there right now and do what they got to do, so. But it just, it changes you, and the thing is, you think you're still the same person, and until one day you realize that, why was I so mean to that guy last night? Why did I yell at my kid for that? It wasn't that big a deal, and you just wonder why you do things. And then we thought we were insane, just thought we were nuts. Board drove us nuts. And when they came out with the PTSD diagnosis, we were happy about it. Oh, I have something that could be fixed, my parents talked me into going to a psychologist. Must have been about, it was just before I moved up north, so it had to be about 75 or something, 1975. And I went in and he said, well, tell me what's going on. And I talked for 45 minutes, and he looked at me and he goes, I don't know what to say to you. I said, I don't know what to tell you. I said, you need to find a psychologist who's a veteran. He said, he said, I don't know what to say. This never came up in any of the training I've had, in any of the education I've had. And so we just kind of felt like there was nobody that could help us, And then, and most of the good side, oh God, the psychologist I had, I used to hate that guy. He wouldn't let you off the hook. I remember going and we had a one-on-one once a month, and then we had group the rest of the time.